Clara Mae Thompson pressed her cold hands against the wrought iron of the Sentinel Peak gate. She needed to convince the estate's master, Elias Vance, to grant her sanctuary from the man she was forced to marry. But Elias had already refused a dozen wealthy brides, and she had nothing to offer but calloused hands and a desperate story. Failure meant being dragged back to Jasper Creek in a life of misery. This gate was her last hope before the winter snows closed the pass for good. The wind bit through her thin wool coat, a constant reminder of the season turning against her. Beyond the bars, a gravel path snaked through ancient pines, disappearing toward a house she could only imagine. No smoke curled from its chimneys, no welcoming light shone from its windows. It was a fortress, built to keep the world out, and she was asking to be let in. The townspeople called Elias Vance the Mountain King, a man whose heart was as hard as the gold he pulled from the earth. They said he saw people as assets or liabilities, nothing more. The rejected brides had returned to town with stories of his cold gaze and dismissive questions, their pride shattered. Clara had no pride left to shatter. Pride was a luxury for those with choices. She had run out of choices 2 days ago when her father had presented the marriage contract. The land deed carries an old stamp, he had said, but Silas Croft's coin is new. She had seen the look in Silas's eyes, a possessive gleam that promised ownership, not partnership. So she had packed a small satchel with bread, a worn blanket, and her mother's silver locket, and fled into the mountains. Now her food was gone, and her hope was a flickering ember. She reached for the heavy iron bell pull, its rope stiff with frost. The sound was a low, mournful clang that the wind seemed to swallow immediately. She waited, her breath pluming in the frigid air, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The cold seeped deeper, numbing her fingers and toes. She was about to turn away, to face the wilderness and its inevitable conclusion, when a figure emerged from the trees. He was tall and broad, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned every rock and pine needle under his feet. This was Elias Vance. He wasn't the monster she'd imagined. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair and eyes the color of a winter sky just before a storm. His face was weathered, not with cruelty, but with the harsh realities of mountain life. He stopped a few feet from the gate, his gaze assessing her worn dress and tired face. His expression was utterly unreadable, a blank mask of stone. He said nothing, simply waiting. The silence was a test, and Clara knew it. "I am not here to offer myself as a bride, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am here to ask for work." That seemed to startle him. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, crossed his features before disappearing. He had expected tears or a rehearsed speech about her family's standing. He had not expected a simple request for employment. This was a deviation from the pattern. The other women had arrived in carriages, their gowns made of silk and their intentions clear. This one arrived on foot, with dust on her hem and desperation in her eyes. Yet she spoke of labor, not love. He studied her hands, still pressed against the bars. They were not the soft, pale hands of a lady. They were red from the cold, with calloused palms and short, clean nails. These were the hands of someone who knew what a day's work felt like. Still, he remained cautious. Trust was a currency he no longer traded in. "What kind of work?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Anything," she replied without hesitation. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend a garden. I learn quickly. I will work for my keep and nothing more." Elias thought of the parade of women who had come before. They had spoken of alliances and fortunes. They had appraised his home with calculating eyes. This woman, Clara Mae Thompson, seemed to be appraising her own chances of survival. Anyone listening in the dark feels the stove warmth hold steady. He saw the truth of her situation in the hollows of her cheeks and the weariness in her posture. Yet there was a core of steel in her that refused to break. "The pass will be snowed in within a week," he stated, not as a warning, but as a fact. "You have nowhere else to go." "No, sir," she agreed quietly. "I do not." His gaze was intense, searching for the lie, for the angle he was missing. He found nothing but stark, unvarnished honesty. It was both unsettling and refreshing. He reached into his coat, and for a heart-stopping moment, Clara thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he produced a heavy iron key. The lock protested with a loud groan, and the gate swung inward. "The housekeeper could use an assistant," he said, his tone flat. "The position is probationary. You will earn your place here, Miss Thompson, or you will be gone when the pass reopens in the spring." A wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy washed over Clara. She stepped through the gate, onto the gravel path that led to a new life, however temporary it might be. She was safe for now. As she followed him toward the house, she did not see him pause to look back at the path where she had stood. He noted the faint, solitary set of footprints in the dirt. He had let her in, but his trust was a fortress far harder to breach than any iron gate. He already had a new test in mind for her. The house was made of stone and dark timber, solid and imposing against the mountain. Inside, it was surprisingly warm, filled with the scent of wood smoke and beeswax. A stout, gray-haired woman with kind eyes met them in the foyer. This was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. Elias spoke to her in low tones, and the woman's gaze softened as she looked at Clara. Within an hour, Clara was shown to a small, clean room in the attic and given a bowl of hot stew that tasted like salvation. She worked tirelessly for the next 2 weeks, scrubbing floors, polishing silver, and helping Mrs. Gable in the kitchen. She rarely saw Elias. He was a phantom in his own home, a presence felt in the orders he left, in the quiet creak of his study door late at night. Clara knew she was being watched, her every action weighed and measured. One afternoon, while dusting the vast library, she found it. Tucked behind a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare, a small object glinted in the dim light. It was a gold nugget, no bigger than her thumb, but heavy and unmistakably real. Her heart leaped. A nugget like that could buy her passage far away from Jasper Creek, far away from any man's claim on her. She could be gone before sunrise. The temptation was a physical ache, a promise of freedom held in the palm of her hand. Her father's words echoed in her mind. The crate bears a mine mark that matches the seal. This gold was from Elias's own mine. It was a piece of his kingdom. She stood there for a long time, the cold metal warming against her skin. This was the test. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. He had left it for her, a trap baited with hope. To steal it would be to prove she was no different from the others, another person trying to take something from him. She closed her hand around the nugget, walked to the massive oak desk in the center of the room, and placed it squarely in the middle. Beside it, she laid a slip of paper on which she had written 5 words. "I believe you misplaced this, sir." Then she returned to her work, her heart a little lighter. That evening, Elias joined her and Mrs. Gable for dinner for the first time. He did not mention the nugget, but his eyes held a new light when he looked at her. It was not warmth, not yet, but the coldness had receded. A grudging respect had taken its place. They began to talk. He asked her about the book she had read, surprised by her knowledge. She told him of her mother, who had been a school teacher and had instilled in her a love of words. In return, he spoke of the mountains, of geology, of the unforgiving logic of the earth. He never spoke of his past, or of why he had built such a high wall around his life. But Clara began to see the man behind the legend. He was not cold, but guarded, not cruel, but wounded. The quiet companionship grew between them, a fragile plant in the rocky soil of his mistrust. One morning, the clang of the gate bell shattered the peaceful mountain silence. It was not the mournful sound Clara had made, but an angry, insistent ringing. Elias went to the door himself. On his porch stood 2 men. One was Silas Croft, his face a mask of smug triumph. The other was the pastor from Jasper Creek, a man whose piety was a thin veneer over a core of self-righteous cruelty. Silas held up a piece of paper. "The Trading Post ledger shows 3 names from last winter, but this is a legal document." "I've come for my betrothed, Vance," Silas said, his voice dripping with possessiveness. "This is a contract, signed and witnessed. The girl belongs to me." Elias's face became a granite cliff. He stood barring the doorway, a silent, immovable obstacle. Clara had appeared behind him, her face ashen. The sanctuary she had found had just been breached. Her past had caught up to her, and it wore a sneer of righteous ownership. Silas Croft had brought the law and the church to his side. Elias Vance had only his formidable will. The pastor stepped forward, his expression pious and condemning. "Mr. Vance, you are harboring a runaway. This is a matter of moral decency. The community expects you to uphold the sanctity of a legal betrothal. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The warmth of the house seemed to leach away, replaced by the familiar chill of fear. Silas's eyes roamed over her, a look of appraisal that made her skin crawl. He was imagining his victory, her return to Jasper Creek, her submission. But something had changed in Clara over the past weeks. She had found more than just shelter in this house. She had found a sliver of her own strength. "I will not go with him," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She stepped out from behind Elias to face them. "That contract was made against my will. I do not belong to him." Silas laughed, a short, ugly sound. "It doesn't matter what you want, girl. It's settled. Your father settled it." Elias had remained silent, his gaze fixed on Silas. Now he spoke, his voice dangerously low. "Miss Thompson is under my protection. She is an employee in my household. You have no claim here." "An employee?" the pastor scoffed. "We've heard the whispers, Vance. An unmarried woman living under your roof. It's a scandal. Return her to her rightful fiancé, and we can forget this ever happened. It is the only respectable path." The word respectable was a weapon, and they wielded it with precision. They were trapping him, using social convention as the bars of a cage. He could either bow to their pressure or be branded a man of low morals, an outcast in the community he dominated financially, but had never truly joined. Clara saw the trap closing around them. She could not let him be ruined for her sake. "I will go," she whispered, her heart breaking. "It is not your fight." "It is now," Elias said without looking at her. He turned his full attention back to Silas. "You speak of contracts and what is settled. I too am a man who understands agreements." He walked over to a small writing desk in the foyer and pulled out a large leather-bound book. He opened it on a table for the pastor and Silas to see. "This is the ledger for the company store at my northern mine," Elias explained calmly. "I see your name here quite often, Croft. Debts for tools, for whiskey, for supplies. It seems you owe me a considerable sum." The ledger shows a debt of over $500, a fortune for a man like Silas. Silas's face paled. The pastor peered at the numbers, his brow furrowed. "A debt I can call due at any time," Elias continued, his voice like chipping ice. "I could seize your land, your tools, everything. You would be left with nothing but that piece of paper you value so highly." The power in the room had shifted entirely. Silas's smugness evaporated, replaced by a desperate, cornered fury. He had come with the law on his side, only to find himself snared by the unwritten laws of commerce and power. The Mountain King had just reminded them who truly ruled this valley. Anyone who has ever faced a bully knows this moment, the moment the tables turn. "This is not over, Vance," Silas snarled, but his threat was hollow. Elias ignored him. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. He was offering her a way out, but it would come at a cost for both of them. "There is one way to settle all accounts," Elias said, his gaze locked with hers. "We will draw up a new contract, one that supersedes all others." He paused, and the air grew thick with tension. "Clara May Thompson will become my wife." The pastor gasped. Silas stared, his mouth agape, a look of pure disbelief on his face. Clara felt as if the world had stopped spinning. Marriage, to Elias Vance. It was not a proposal of love, but a strategic move on a chessboard. It was a shield, a fortress, a final, unbreachable defense against her past. He was offering her his name, the most powerful thing he owned, to protect her. But it was also another kind of cage, a golden one, but a cage nonetheless. She had fled one contract only to be presented with another. "Marry me, Clara," Elias said, and his voice was no longer the command of a king, but the quiet plea of a man laying his last card on the table. "It is the only way." The silence in the foyer was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock. Silas Croft's face was a mottled canvas of fury and humiliation. The pastor looked utterly bewildered, his moral crusade hijacked by a move he could never have anticipated. Clara's mind raced. Marrying Elias would save her from Silas forever. It would give her security, a home, a life she could never have imagined. But it would be a marriage born of necessity, not affection. A business transaction. She looked at Elias, really looked at him. She saw the man who had tested her with a gold nugget and respected her for her honesty. She saw the man who had slowly, cautiously let her into the quiet corners of his life. He was not offering her a fairy tale. He was offering her a partnership, a pact of mutual protection. In his world, that was perhaps the closest thing to a declaration of love he was capable of making. She thought of the life that awaited her with Silas, a life of fear and submission. Then she looked at the life before her, a life of quiet dignity and respect with a man who, for all his walls, had proven himself to be honorable. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I will marry you, Mr. Vance." The wedding was a quiet affair, held in the library with only Mrs. Gable and a traveling justice of the peace as witnesses. There was no white dress, no flowers, no celebration. It was a solemn exchange of vows, a legal binding of two solitary people. Afterward, life at the mansion continued much as it had before. They were husband and wife in name, but they remained two people sharing a house, separated by a chasm of unspoken feelings. They ate their meals together, often in comfortable silence. In the evenings, she would read by the fire while he worked on his ledgers. The arrangement was polite, respectful, and deeply lonely. Clara realized that while the marriage had solved her immediate problem, it had created a new one. She had not just found a protector in Elias, she had found a man she was beginning to care for deeply. She saw his kindness in small moments, the way he made sure the woodpile was always stocked for Mrs. Gable, the way he left books he thought she might enjoy on the table in the hall. But he kept his heart locked away as securely as he had once locked his gate. Spring began to thaw the mountains. As the snow receded, Clara started a garden on the south side of the house. She found solace in turning the soil, in planting seeds and nurturing new life. It was her own small piece of the world, a place where she could create something beautiful. One afternoon, Elias found her there, her hands covered in dirt, a smudge of soil on her cheek. He watched her for a long time from the porch. "My mother had a garden," he said, his voice quiet. He walked down the steps and stood beside a row of newly planted peas. "She said it was proof that even after the harshest winter, life finds a way to return." It was the first time he had ever mentioned his family. Clara stopped her work, sensing a rare opening. "Tell me about her," she prompted gently. He spoke for an hour, telling her of his childhood in a rough mining camp, of a mother who loved books, and a father who had been broken by the mines. He told her of the woman he had loved, a woman who had taken his first gold strike and disappeared, leaving him with a fortune and a heart full of ash. That betrayal was the reason he had built his fortress, the reason he tested everyone who came near. He had been waiting for them all to fail, to prove his mistrust was justified. "You never did," he said, looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. "You passed every test, Clara, especially the ones I never intended to set." In that moment, standing in the middle of her new garden, Clara understood. The quiet respect between them was not the end of their story, but the foundation. Love was not always a sudden fire. Sometimes it was a seed planted in rocky soil, slowly, patiently tended until it was strong enough to bloom. "This marriage," she said softly, "it does not have to be just a contract, Elias." He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to gently wipe the smudge of dirt from her cheek. His touch was warm and steady. "It hasn't been just a contract for a long time," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I started falling in love with you the day you left that gold nugget on my desk." He leaned in and kissed her, not with the gentle reverence of their wedding day, but with all the pent-up longing of a man finally allowing his heart to thaw. It was a kiss that promised not just a future, but a shared life, a true partnership built on something far more valuable than gold. The iron gate at the bottom of the path still stood, a monument to the day she arrived. But it was no longer a barrier. It was the beginning of the road home. Together they had built something neither of them could have built alone, a sanctuary founded not on stone and iron, but on honesty, respect, and a love that had quietly, patiently waited for spring.